He was born Shelton Jackson Lee on March 20th, 1957 in Atlanta, Georgia. A small, wiry youngster, the nickname Spike would be given by his mother, Jacqueline Lee, who was a teacher of the arts and black literature and quite the cinephile. His father, Bill Lee, a bass player and jazz composer, made his living as a musician, gigging with various bands and collaborating with some of the top singers of the day, which included, among others, Billie Holiday. Now, it's safe to say Dad spent a fair share of his time away from the family. Well, young Spike naturally sought the comfort and safety of Mom, who pampered and treated him as if he were the center of the universe. Now, Jacqueline's attention and affection was such that her own mother, Spike's grandmother, grew increasingly worried that her first grandchild would grow up to be a mama's boy. Well, Grandma needed not worry, as Spike was a tough one from the start, a toughness that would truly benefit him when it came to following his dreams. Welcome to House of Words, a podcast about writers, determination, and dedication. I am your host, Jason Nemore Harden, inviting you to join us as we take a peek at the makings of Spike Lee and She's Gotta Have It. Quote, I never went to NYU expecting teachers to teach me. I just wanted equipment so I could make films and learn filmmaking by making films. I just wanted the equipment, that's all. You don't have to go to film school. There are lots of centers or places where you can rent equipment at low prices. You have to get your hands on some equipment, shoot, and make films. That's the only way to learn. People call me now wanting to know what the secret to successful filmmaking is. I get so mad. There's no secret formula, let's say, for the success of She's Gotta Have It. I'm not going to tell them anything that will help them. We just killed ourselves to get it made. That's how we did it. End quote. Literature being a big part of the Lee household, Jacqueline Lee loved giving her kids books to read. At the top of Mom's list was literature by black writers, like Langston Hughes, for example. You see, during Spike's early years, there was no Black History Month nor multicultural components within the curriculum, so she was not about to rely on the public school system to teach her children about their own history. Now, being a lover of the arts, she frequently took Spike and his siblings to plays and museums, while their father saw to the kids' musical education. Now, young Spike learned piano and violin at home and picked up the recorder at school along with his classmates. In the end, however, the music bug did not grab his attention, nor the instruments he'd learned. His artistic aspirations were elsewhere. Encouraged by their mother, Spike and his siblings saw their fair share of movies. He recalls catching films at Radio City Music Hall, Bye Bye Birdie, James Bond films, and even The Beatles' A Hard Day's Night. However, the first movie that gripped his young mind was Atari. Atari is a film about a safari starring John Wayne. Funny thing is, it was actually the rhinoceros in the film that seemed to grab his attention. Although fond of films, the fact that the great majority starred white people like John Wayne and Sean Connery, there was a disconnect. It's no secret that in the 1960s, very few black actors were offered starring or even major roles. Now, the one exception one could argue was Sidney Poitier, but the roles he appeared in were not very realistic, according to Spike. Now, he remembers being roughly 6 or 7 years old when he saw his first Poitier film, Lilies of the Field. In the film, Poitier plays a drifter hired as a handyman by a group of nuns and ends up building a church for them. I hated that movie, Lee once said, and added how he felt like throwing a rock through the screen. No way anyone would be as nice as that handyman character. Well, even as a youngster, he understood that the only way white audiences could accept a black character was if the role was akin to a perfect human being. Still fascinated by movies somehow, they seemed out of reach. He didn't understand how they were made, nor that they were actually made by people. All he knew was that he went into a movie house, the lights went off, the movie began, and one enjoyed the show while snacking on popcorn, candy, and soda. And once it was done, the lights came back on, and you'd go home. Well, that seems like a little less than magic. Martin Scorsese and Akira Kurosawa, among others, created some of his favorite films, but it wasn't until he saw Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter that his destiny became clear to him. When the film was over, he and friend John Wilson hopped in a cab when Spike turned to Wilson and said, "John, I know what I want to do. I want to make films." From then on, he could talk of little else and began gravitating towards like-minded folks. Friends of his would later recall his constant scribbling of ideas in notebooks, making plans for films, and dreaming of a new era of black filmmaking in Hollywood. As John Wilson put it, referring to Hollywood, Spike didn't want to just get in the door of the house. He wanted to get in, rearrange the furniture, then go back and publicize the password. A career in the world of film didn't seem realistically attainable for young Spike. Now, what did seem more realistic at this point were sports, and he liked most of them. Basketball, football, baseball, he loved to play. Not the best athlete, he always managed to be anointed captain of the team as a result of his competitiveness. Spike simply had a need to win. Now, when not playing, he watched sports on TV. Of course, not being an only child, a constant battle in the Lee household, particularly with his sister, was whether to watch the Knicks or the Brady Bunch. I wonder who won those battles. Anyway, despite his love of sports, soon came the realization that sports stardom was not in the cards for him. Though he put up a confident front, he was quite sensitive to life in general and was embarrassed by his small size. He donned a large afro, which added a good 3 or 4 inches to his height, but it wasn't enough. By the time he reached high school, he accepted the fact that he wasn't going to grow tall or big enough, a myth, of course, to compete in any sports on any professional level. He was destined to be small like his father. He finally measured out 5 feet 6 inches tall and 120 pounds. A career as an athlete faded away. This bothered him for a while, but in the end, practicality set in. He would be important in some other way. But what? The year was 1971 when Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's badass song kicked off the rise of a new money-making market for Hollywood, blaxploitation. Now, Spike never got caught up in the hype, and as a matter of fact, never watched most of the famous films from the genre until he was already a recognized filmmaker. Anyway, by 1976, 3 years before he graduated from Morehouse College, Hollywood had ceased making blaxploitation films. Now, the few that were being made featured a few blacks. However, there were mostly white faces behind the cameras writing, directing, and producing the films. Now, this was a major concern for Spike, who wanted to change that. Now, rumor has it that he made a couple of films while at Morehouse, including Last Hustle in Brooklyn and Black College, The Talented Tenth. Now, he later felt both were subpar and was pleased that no copies were in circulation. Some good did come from these endeavors, however. It led him to understand the need to get better at his craft. If he wanted to get better, however, he knew he'd have to venture out. So in his senior year, he applied to film school at New York University and was accepted. The New York University Institute of Film and Television was and is one of the most prestigious film schools in the nation, but he soon felt that NYU in its own way was just as conservative as Morehouse. As one of only a handful of blacks at the school, he felt pressure to conform, especially after he made his first student film in 1980, a film not so well received by his professors. Titled The Answer, it was about a black screenwriter hired to direct a $50 million remake of the 1915 silent film classic, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. He included parts of the original film in his project. Well, His professors disapproved of his interpretation, considering it a denigration of Griffith, regarded by many as the father of American cinema. Now, while they did not charge him with outright disrespect, they criticized the film for being overambitious. First off, first-year student films are only meant to be 10 minutes long, and to remake Birth of a Nation in 10 minutes was quite a heavy burden. Secondly, they criticized him for not having yet mastered film grammar or the techniques of filmmaking. Well, Spike, convinced then and now, felt that the problem was less his lack of technique, but more his criticism of Griffith. Fortunately for both NYU and Spike, he was invited to continue in the program, enjoying a much smoother experience during his second year. He was awarded a teaching assistantship, and in exchange for working in the school's equipment room, he received full tuition. As a result, he used tuition money given to him by his grandmother for that year to produce his films. In 1983, Spike Lee received his master's degree from the New York University Tisch School of the Arts after submitting his 1-hour-long film, Joe's Bed-Stuy Barbershop, We Cut Heads, as his master's thesis. He was soon signed by both the International Creative Management and William Morris agencies. Both firms were looking for a young black director, given the recent evidence of a slow resurgence of films about the black experience, and Spike fit the bill. However, no job offers were coming through the agency, so to support himself, he found work cleaning and shipping film for First Run Features, a movie distribution house. Definitely not the ascension into stardom he was hoping for, but the $200 weekly salary at least allowed him to move out of his father's house. He found a studio apartment with a kitchen on Myrtle Avenue, just around the corner from the family home. But it could be a world away if he wanted. There in his own place, he filled notebook upon notebook with film ideas, one of which was The Messenger, a film about a family in Brooklyn with the protagonist being a bike messenger. This was the film he was keen on making next. Being fresh out of film school, he had no idea of the harsh realities of raising money to make films. His first dose of reality was learning that funding sources would not give him money outright. They would only give it to a not-for-profit tax-exempt organization. So he went to Warrington Hutland, founder of the Black Filmmaker Foundation, which had distributed 2 of his student films, and got Hutland to agree that his foundation would serve as the agent for the grants. Now, in escrow was a $20,000 grant from the American Film Institute, which was not payable until actual production began, a $10,000 grant from the Jerome Foundation, money borrowed from his grandmother, and the promise to raise the remainder of the necessary financial backing from a friend of the family. Anxious to get started, Spike refused to wait for all or even most of the money to be in pocket, and began the pre-production phase of The Messenger in the summer of 1984. So he formed his own production company, 40 Acres and a Mule Filmworks, where he was president and Monty Ross, his friend in Atlanta, was vice president. Now, from his experience as a Hollywood intern, he decided he wanted to control all aspects of his films. He hired the crew, scouted locations, cast the actors, you name it. Short of funds to pay union actor fees, he worked out a deal, or so he thought, with the Screen Actors Guild by seeking a waiver of their usual rules based on the argument that his film was not commercial. Now, such waivers are often granted for low-budget independent films, leading him to believe he is qualified. In the end, the promised money did not come through, leading to sleepless nights worrying about what to do. His stomach churned so much that he couldn't eat, which led to lost weight. He couldn't pay his bills, and to top it all off, when the film had been in pre-production for 8 weeks, the Screen Actors Guild refused to allow the waiver, saying that his film was too commercial. Finding himself in a dire situation, given that he'd already spent $40,000 paying a crew and non-union actors, and suddenly having just 4 days to recast the film with union actors, Spike was forced to give up the project. It was the most painful experience of his professional life. He lost the $20,000 his grandmother had invested, plus the people who turned down other work to be a part of his project, which was now a bust, were furious. Defeated for the moment, he sat in a bathtub filled with water and cried. A man who didn't cry at his mother's funeral. This made him weep. Now, after crying, after accepting defeat, he felt better and soon enough regained his fighting spirit. The messenger fiasco, he decided, was a good learning experience. Next time around, just write a script with only a few characters, use inexpensive neighborhood locations, and hold a low budget. Most important, pre-production begins when the money is in the bank. With this in mind, he made a promise to himself. The following summer, he would be ready to create his first full feature film. Quote,
try to pull something from within. Find your voice and work on your voice, because everybody does not have the gift of knowing exactly what they want to say. And be honest. A lot of times people have not discovered who they are.
End quote. On October 4th, 1984, Spike wrote in his journal, I came up with the title for my next script, She's Gotta Have It. Further down in his journal, the same day, it's really a pleasure not having to go to work. Take it easy and just devote my time to creative endeavors. I don't know how long my money is going to last, but I'm going to enjoy it while I can. I've never had this opportunity just to write and do nothing else. It's a luxury that only the white writers usually have. I hope to do a lot of work this winter. Here's the list. Doing this now. 1. Research and write She's Gotta Have It. 2. Rewrite Titan, Messenger. 3. Rewrite Titan, It's Homecoming. 4. Start researching Birmingham, Brooklyn. The above is more than enough work to keep me occupied for the cold winter months. I'm writing again on October 17th. When I get some money, I'm going to purchase a typewriter so I can start sending out letters and so I can type my own goddamn script. I hope to start the actual writing of it around the 1st of December. I don't see it taking more than 2 months. I'm talking about the first draft. Hopefully we'll be ready to shoot in May. On December 1st, and after a lot of footwork, he wrote, it's 8:15 in the morning. In a couple of minutes, I'll start the actual writing of the script. I'm going to keep my mind open and let the muse pay me a visit. Then on December 7th, so far the script I feel is funny as shit. I haven't let anyone read it yet either, but I know it's funny. People are going to be dying. Seems his word is bond, as on December 21st, he wrote, it's 11:30 and I have just finished the first draft of She's Gotta Have It. This is the fastest script I've written. It was also the easiest to write. Spike was determined to develop a script that could be done for as little money as possible, yet profitable, at the same time being important to him. It was also vital that it make a statement. 3 years had passed since he'd made a film, and after the Messenger ordeal, he was anxious to get back to fulfilling his dream. Now, feeling that black love was noticeably absent from the silver screen, he planned to remedy that with lots of shots of black love and lovemaking. And the protagonist would be a young, attractive, independent black woman named Nola Darling. She'd share a birthday with Malcolm X and would apply her talent as a graphic designer to protest the senseless killing of 2 black New Yorkers by the police. The main plot, however, would be about the way Nola Darling managed to juggle 3 boyfriends, each having wildly different personalities. Spike wanted to explore the double standard of how men and women are treated in relation to sex, men being encouraged to fool around, while females are labeled as prostitutes, nymphos, or whores for doing the same. Now, he immediately fell in love with the plot and realized the importance of not rushing it, doing it right. He knew he'd be breaking down a host of barriers, narrative and structure-wise, undoubtedly, and not to mention the challenging of taboos and talking openly about sex. So the first mission was to talk to as many female friends as possible and get to know how they felt about sex. After all, the narrative needed to be real or else it would lose credibility and ultimately flop. So before writing one single word of dialogue, he teamed up with Tracy Willard, a former female schoolmate, to create a survey of 40 questions, very personal questions pertaining to sexual habits and relationships and so on. They gave the survey to 32 black women, most of them college graduates, and recorded their answers on tape. From those taped sessions, they gathered background and insight into the kind of woman Nola Darling could be. Now, what Spike soon realized was that women wanted the same thing men want: sexual exploration. As 1984 gave way to 1985, the first draft of She's Gotta Have It was complete by January 9th and registered with the Writers Guild of America by the 23rd. And with the budget being very low and his determination to get it done, the project would have very few characters, purely local Brooklyn settings, no sets, no costumes. Our color was too expensive, so he would shoot in black and white on the less expensive 16mm film rather than 35. Now, he did manage to secure an $18,000 grant from the New York State Council on the Arts and a $500 grant from the Brooklyn Arts and Cultural Association. His grandma, reliable as ever, pitched in as well as friends who contributed small amounts. Now, for a moment, he also formed a limited partnership to sell shares of the film for $15,000 apiece, but unfortunately, not many investors bought in. Just as well, you see, Spike, determined to remain as independent as possible, ultimately did not want to give up control of his film. Well, the spring of 1985 arrived, and he did precisely what he planned not to do. Pre-production began without the necessary funds in the bank. He placed an ad in Backstage, the entertainment trade newspaper, announcing auditions for the few roles in the film. From there, he found his cast. Now, as a cost-cutting measure, he cast himself as the third boyfriend, Mars Blackman, a rapping streetwise character. Grandma Zimmy suggested the name Mars after an uncle named Mars, whom she said was crazy. Now, several other roles were also kept in the family. His father wrote the score, his brother David filmed the opening credit sequence and winter montage, while his youngest brother Cinque was the production assistant, and his sister Joie was offered a bit part as a former roommate of Nola Darling. Moving right along to the end of June 1985, Spike requested a month off from his job at First Run Features and was told that the firm perhaps would not need him to return afterwards. In effect, he was fired. Now he had to worry about paying rent and utility bills, in addition to paying for the film. Now, having long since graduated from NYU, he was fortunate enough to secure permission to conduct his first script readings at the school's facilities. And once he felt sure that the actors knew their lines and understood their characters' motivations, it was time to go on location. A shooting officially began on July 5, 1985, with the primary location being a large loft above the Ferry Bank restaurant in the Fort Greene section of Brooklyn and a few shots in Fort Greene Park. Now, at the end of each day of shooting, given the ongoing money issues, he and Monty Ross would turn to each other and wonder where the money for the next day would come from. They called or wrote to everyone they knew asking for any amount they could spare. Nevertheless, in spite of all the money issues and inexperienced actors and crew, the filming took 12 days to complete. Next up was the editing process. Of course, and again, money was a problem, but Spike, no stranger to adversity, had the solution. He put on the editor's hat. He rented a 6-reel film editing machine, spending hours in his apartment cutting and splicing. Well, each rough cut needed processing, right? And yes, that cost money. At one point, the film processing laboratory threatened to auction off the negatives for the film unless he could come up with the $2,000 he owed them by 5 o'clock that afternoon. Fortunately for Spike, Nelson George, a music critic who had become interested in the project, agreed to pay the entire bill. By the final edit, the money well had finally run dry, so Spike proceeded to show the film to anyone who'd watch it in hopes of raising the necessary funds to complete the film. NYU would lend a hand again, allowing him to use their modest theater to showcase the rough cut to an audience of industry executives and artists. Now, this was or perhaps the major turning point. When the film was over, he stepped to the front of the theater and proclaimed, "I'm Spike Lee, and I hope that you like the film. And I'll be calling you soon about becoming financially involved and helping us complete it." And that was that. The necessary funds came in that night. There was even enough to expand from 16 to 35 millimeter film. By the time She's Gotta Have It was edited and ready for distribution, it cost a total of $175,000. Downright peanuts by Hollywood standards. The film was well received at the Cannes Film Festival, where it won the Prix de la Jeunesse. It was also quite the hit at the San Francisco Film Festival, where a host of distributors requested distribution rights, with Island Films getting the nod due to their innovative ideas for marketing the film. Now, Island also agreed to let him keep music publishing on the soundtrack, sequel rights, and the right of consultation with respect to all marketing and advertising. The official public opening was August 8, 1986 at New York Cinema Studio with mostly favorable reviews. She's Gotta Have It earned $1.8 million in its first 3 weeks. Spike felt vindicated and quite relieved that the film had done so well. Even his most important and consistent investor, Grandma, liked the movie, except the cursing, of course. He would later recall the anxiety he experienced every day, wondering where the next nickel to make the film would come from, and it made him feel a little sick just to think about it. In the end, the film brought in nearly $8 million at the box office, which is quite a handsome turnaround for an independent filmmaker. And based on the success of She's Gotta Have It, Island Films, the distributor, offered him $4 million for his next project, which was a huge amount of money for a young filmmaker. He was about to undertake a far more ambitious film, a musical like those he had loved as a child. That, however, would not all go according to plan. But more on that on another episode of House of Words. As usual, here is a final quote providing a few words of wisdom from the young go-getter. "I've been blessed with the opportunity to express the views of Black people who otherwise don't have access to power and the media. I have to take advantage of that while I'm still bankable." End quote. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and will spread the word about the podcast. Once again, I have been your host, Jason Nemore Harden. We here at House of Words ask that you please consider helping to make this show easier to produce and more frequent by contributing on our Patreon page at patreon.com/houseofwords or paypal.me/houseofwordspodcast. Alternatively, you can like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page and encourage others who may find what we offer interesting to do the same at House of Words Podcast. Every little bit helps, more than you might think. Until next time, keep turning those pages. House of Words is written and produced by Cristo M. Sanchez. Narrated and written by me, Jason Nemore Harden, and music by Creature 9 and Wood. All rights and ownership belong to Cristo M. Sanchez and Jason Nemore Harden.